Today's message is entitled, Slaves, Debts, and Talents. Do you guys ever feel like you're doing something that you're not built to do? There are times that I feel like a fish out of water trying to educate our kids. We have 5 in 3 different grades right now. I feel inadequate and incapable a lot of times. I wonder a lot how God chose to put me in that position. Why that role of leadership in their lives? It's never felt like an area of strength or competence for me. I always struggle with trying to balance the hours available in a day, right? Trying to cover all the bases with everything that I'm responsible to do, with everything that's on my plate. I wish that I could tell you that the battle is fierce and I'm getting closer to where I have more days than not where I'm actually conquering the territory. But the truth is that I don't remember the last time that I actually put my head on the pillow and felt like I won. Even though I am a very highly structured, methodical planner, I schedule very intentionally. Even though I do this, there are still some times where I feel like I'm running around in this flurry of activity trying to cover all the bases. And I end up feeling like all I can do is salvage whatever I can from all the unexpected and unforeseen events and the distractions that have wormed their way past my schedule and into my day. You ever feel like that? I think this is a common occurrence among people, but the problem is that this is not the way God has designed us to live. I think this perspective puts us in a place where we cannot be completely obedient. Let me see if I can explain to you why I believe this. A few weeks ago, I was in my worship time, and I was taking this personal inventory of all the things that I should be grateful for in my life. All the ways that God's hand has led me through and to this place to where I am right now. It didn't take me very long to come to the conclusion that I don't deserve to live the life that I get to live. I get to live a life that is beyond what I thought was possible for me. There are lots of people who have more financially than I do, but there are considerably more people who have less than what I do. There are tons of people who have experienced things that I have not. But there are innumerably more who don't get to see or to hear or to experience the things that I get to on a daily basis. While I will convince and encourage everyone to abandon this thought of comparison living, no matter who I meet, I think it's important that every once in a while we take a personal inventory of our own lives, and it should create in us a grateful heart. An important truth popped out to me during this experience. I started talking about worship a couple of weeks ago, and I hope this never, ever leaves me. You see, God has taught me a ton of things over the last couple of years about the truth regarding obedience. Not only what exactly it is, but how it wasn't happening in my life, and how I was missing out on so much that He had planned for me because of it. As I sat writing in my worship time during this day, I began to realize once again how full my life is. But this time, not seeing things as stuff that drags me down and should prevent me from accomplishing something else, but as things that have been assigned to me. Things entrusted to me that I need to be more determined to manage better rather than complaining about how they inconvenience me. As I was writing, this parable pops into my head, right, from the Bible, and this takes on such a completely different meaning than it ever has had for me my entire life. Now, I'm sure that most of you have probably heard this story before, but I want you to listen to this intently. Every word of this like it's the first time you've heard it, and then I want you to prepare yourself for an approach to this that I guarantee you have never, ever heard. Are you ready? All right, look at Matthew 25, verses 14 to 30. For it is just like a man going on a journey. He called his own slaves and he turned over his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. Then he went on a journey. Immediately the man who received 5 talents went, put them to work, and earned 5 more. In the same way the man who with 2 earned 2 more. But the man who received 1 talent went off. He dug a hole in the ground and he hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came home and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 talents approached. He presented his 5 talents and said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. Look, I've earned 5 more talents. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share in your master's joy. Then the man with 2 talents also approached, and he said, Master, you gave me 2 talents. Look, I've earned 2 more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge over many things. Share in your master's joy. Then the man who had received 1 talent also approached, and he said, Master, I know you're a difficult man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went off and I hid your talent in the ground. Look, you have what is yours. But the master replied to him, you evil, lazy slave. If you knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gathered where I haven't scattered, then you should have at least deposited my money with the bankers. And when I returned, I would have received my money back with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him, and throw for this good-for-nothing slave into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Heard the story before? As soon as I finished reading this story that day, I became immediately aware that my perspective about the complexity of my life and how I can tend to whine about it needed adjustment. I know this passage of Scripture is oftentimes shared in the context of accountability. Right? I know the prosperity doctrine camp has adapted this thing to their own deal. But listen, here's the real truth behind this story. Are you ready for this? The master in this story went on a journey, knowing that he'd be gone for a long time, but eventually he would return. While he was gone, he arranged for those that belonged to him to be taken care of. Opportunities to use his resources to create a return. Right? Avenues on which they could prove themselves faithful and trustworthy. The responses were identical for the first 2 slaves. Right? But it was very, very different for the third. The first 2 took what they'd been given, all that had been entrusted to them, and they focused on doing all they could with those resources. It didn't matter how much they'd been given. Their individual efforts produced an identical result. It was 100% return. See, this is why comparison living is always a stupid idea. Because we're never going to be held accountable for how we performed relative to somebody else. We are going to be held accountable for what we did with what we were given. You follow? So, as a result of their labors, upon the master's return, not only was he pleased, but he presented them with something that was so much more valuable than what they had created with what had been entrusted to them. He presented them with his blessing and his respect. Now, the third slave, his response, a little different. Knowing how powerful, how impactful his master could be on his life, he took what had been given to him and he buried it. Believing that if he could just return to the master what was his, untouched, unused, unbroken, hopefully he would be okay, right? Unfortunately, upon the master's return, having done nothing with what he'd been given, didn't exactly produce the response he was expecting. In fact, the master was livid that the slave had done nothing to improve what he'd been given. There hadn't even been an effort to try. The master has this complete meltdown. He takes away what was given to the slave, and then he throws him out of what had become the comfort of his own home. Now, some of you might be thinking at this point, going, well, you know what? Maybe the slave is better off. Right? Doesn't the story reveal a few things about this so-called master that not exactly shiny? Right? Look at verse 24 again. The man who had received 1 talent also approached and said, Master, I know you. You're a difficult man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. Now, at first glance, this sounds like somebody who should be on a wanted poster somewhere, right? Someone who operates unfairly and unscrupulously. Is that really what it says? All right, let's look at that in a second. Let's consider the fact that this guy, he's got slaves. Isn't that a deplorable concept in today's society? How could anyone ever consider themselves decent if this is the way they're going to treat other human beings, right? Well, the truth is that during this era of time, people racked up these monstrous debts for a myriad of reasons. It sounds an awful lot like today, right? But the truth is that back then, if you were unable to cover your debts, it could cost you your freedom. In order to avoid prison, or the fastest way to lose 8 pounds, you know what I'm saying? People submitted themselves to someone else who was capable of covering the debts that they couldn't pay. This was referred to as indentured servitude. People voluntarily made themselves slaves to someone else for either an agreed upon time or until the terms of this debt were satisfied. Would it make any difference for you to understand that the slaves in this story were indentured? Would it change anything for you to understand that the first two, they just missed having their heads removed for being implicated in a murder that they did not commit? The master was an attorney who happened to know these men and believed in their innocence. He was a very accomplished and talented man of the law, and he got them off. But these were poor men that were unable to pay his fee. They were more than grateful to indenture themselves, to pay off this debt that they couldn't take care of. You could see why, right? They were so grateful for having been rescued from this situation that they didn't cause, but they had to face nonetheless. There was nothing too great that their rescuer could ask of them. There was no lengths to which they wouldn't go, no task too difficult, no opportunity they would not chase and pursue with everything they had just to please the one who had rescued them from death. Are you listening? Now, the third slave, he was also indentured. The master had agreed to take in this guy, the reckless brother of his daughter's husband. This guy was facing jail time for having caused a bunch of damage during a drunken brawl one night. The master freed this man by intimidating the bar owner. He convinced him that if he didn't take the money that he was offering to pay off this guy's debt and let him go, that he was going to leak information to the magistrate, and that was going to cause all kinds of other troubles for this bar owner. Does that clarify just a little what the third slave was saying when he said, "Master, I know that you're a hard man. You reap where you haven't sown and you gather where you haven't scattered seed"? Does it add any perspective to why the master responded so harshly to the third slave? You see, this guy had avoided a dreadful fate too, but this one was one that he deserved for his choices. The master, he incurred this debt. He paid out of his pocket for this guy, and then somehow further ensured that the repercussions would not resurface later on in the future. Now, the rescued. He's got this opportunity to move through life making some different choices and not looking over his shoulder. He has a chance to show a little appreciation for the one who secured the new lease on his life by being responsible and a little proactive with some funds that the same guy was now putting into his life. But what he did instead was he proved who he really was. He was a lazy, unappreciative consumer. He buried his master's trust and generosity, and then he blamed his lack of production on the very reputation that was bold enough to save him. So what does this have to do with you or me or this worship time that I was talking about? Are you seeing the parallels so far in this whole thing? Are they reaching out to you? For those of you who are introduced or experiencing this story in a way that you've never heard it before, let me just say first that everything that I've just shared with you about these guys, how they became slaves, who the master was, it's all fiction. You remember I was telling you that I was in that time and I was taking that inventory and God was pouring things into my heart? As I sat there writing, this parable and these ideas about this is what came to me. So now you've received it kind of the way I have. And hopefully it'll impact you the way it has impacted me. But the truth is that the Bible gives us no information beyond the words that we read in chapter 25 of Matthew. Right? Maybe there were some more details. Maybe there weren't. But I guarantee you, I will never look at this story the same way again. This change in perspective can stand to make a really important point. Sometimes we focus more on the peas than the stick, the wrong ideas. And by looking at things only one way, through them there big holes in the binoculars, they're the little ones, right? we limit ourselves. We miss out on all that was meant to expand our vision and enhance our lives. Let me just chase a rabbit for just a second. If you're not aware at this point in your life that it's just as good a time as any to come to the understanding that this book, the Bible, it's alive. Do you understand this? It's a living, pulsing resource which, through the Holy Spirit of God Himself, never runs out of ways to explain and make understandable the truths of God that were left behind for us, so that we can live our lives in a way that brings glory to the Father as we follow the Son, listening and responding to the Spirit as He creates opportunities for us to be obedient. Do you follow that chronology? Yes? Okay, let's go back to the message. As I was writing during this worship time, this parable is what came flooding into my mind as I'm looking at the contents and the direction and the management of my life. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I can get distracted and I focus on all the wrong things. Oh, the immensity of my life, and I'm not producing very well. Oh, look, all the time. Look at the things I should be moving on with my schedule. Can you relate? You get stuck in your worship this way? But this time, as I'm seeing this parable through this perspective that God's putting in my heart, I see the expanse of my responsibilities as resources that have been entrusted to me. Resources that I should be working with all that I have to produce a return, so that He is pleased with my efforts, so that He can invite me to share in my Master's joy when He returns, saying that His time away is over and now He's come to settle accounts. What did I do with what I had been given? If we're submitted and following, the things that God puts into our life, the things that He entrusts to our care, are the things that we are expected to use in all of the situations and whatever God makes available to us. Jesus rescued us. He stole us away from death and separation and anguish that we deserved because of our sinful condition, that condition that we didn't create but we couldn't address on our own. We should be more than grateful to offer our voluntary servitude in exchange for the gift of being rescued from the finality that was supposed to be our fate. We must learn to use everything that has been entrusted to us by our Master for the honor and glory of our Father. Now, we talk a lot around here about submitting everything, every part of our lives, for whatever God asks for the rest of our days. Right? This still, I think, is creating some uneasiness in some people, but the truth is, it should produce in you just the opposite effect. The person who really understands the fate from which they've been rescued will have no issues whatsoever using everything they've got in gratitude for the one who rescued them. The individual who's been rescued will do anything when the rescuer calls. Think about it this way. For the slave who's been freed, right, who is now put in charge, made the bodyguard over the family and the house of the one who freed him, the greater the sacrifice, the higher the honor, the more dedicated the bodyguard. Do you see that? If you will take an honest, subjective look at your life, your responsibilities and your obligations, your job and your skills, your passions and your talents, right? These are the things that God has left behind for you to use until He returns for those that are His own and settles accounts. What did you do with what you were given? He reaps where He doesn't sow. He gathers where He hasn't scattered. See, God is going to do whatever God chooses to do, and He doesn't answer to anyone. But we can take comfort in this fact, that God is holy. Because He's holy, His omnipotence, His omniscience, His immutability, they're all guided by His truth, His love, His mercy, and His righteousness. How could we ever choose to accept His gift of rescue from the fate that was ours? The condition that we didn't create but we couldn't address on our own, and not be highly motivated to fully use all the resources that He's entrusted to us for His glory? How do we miss that? I talk to people all the time who will look at me and say they're so grateful for what God has done in their lives. But when it comes to sharing with others, I feel so inadequate and so unprepared. I wish I knew more. Listen, this is just a third slave excuse. It's a lie planted in your mind by the enemy, hoping that if they water it enough, it'll just grow in your heart. But the truth is that God, He walks people onto your path and into your life because He wants to use exactly what He has equipped in you for that situation right then. Look at verses 15 to 19 one last time. To one He gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his own ability. Then he went on a journey. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. What is your subjective perspective about the current configuration of your life? Is it a laundry list of all the reasons why you can't? Or is it a list of opportunities to use the things that have been entrusted to you for whatever God walks into your life, so that you can share in your master's joy when He returns and settles accounts and says, what did you do with what you were given? Are you one of the first 2 slaves, voluntarily indentured, grateful, working to receive your master's blessing and His respect? Or are you an ungrateful, lazy consumer, one who's not using what has been put into your life? You will find yourselves someday cast out in the cold without anything. In and among any particular group of people, situations vary, but responses should not. We all get to choose when or if we're going to use what the Master has entrusted to our lives. Will you pick it up? Will you use it and produce all that you can with it? Or will you bury it? Complain about how big your load is and how tired you are. Whine about how much effort it all takes. Complain about your job and your responsibilities. Cry about how hard it is to work and to study and to raise kids and to hit all the marks. Are you going to be a third slave that just has excuses? Oh, the load is just too big. The responsibility is too hard. The pressure is too much and I just don't want to disappoint. Or will you see this? Your expanse of responsibilities, the gifts given to you, the responsibilities assigned to you. Will you see this as the beckoning of your rescuer, who is putting you in charge, who is offering you the opportunity that He hasn't offered anyone else in all of human history? You, in your situation right now. What are you going to do with what you've been given? Holy Father, we exalt your name and we just thank you for the truth of your word. We thank you how creative you are and how you never run out of ways to allow us to see what you've written in this book in ways that work for us, in ways that will allow us to hear what you're saying, that reach our hearts, that cause us to move and to respond. God, I pray that you would allow us to take this with us, to go back and look at this story again, to take a good, honest, subjective look at our lives, at the inventory of the things for which we need to be grateful to you, to take an inventory of the responsibilities and the tasks and the talents and the gifts and the things you've given us, and to see them truly for what they are, this set of assignments you've given us, and how we need to take those, and instead of complaining about how big it is and how heavy it is and all that mess, but that you'd help us to see now how we need to start putting it into use, into work, so that we can produce a return for you that will make you proud of us, that will cause you to invite us to share in your joy. I ask that you not let us walk away from this just having heard it as another parable and go on about life as we've always done it. We ask all these things in the name of Jesus so that you are glorified.